video and other offenders, sex trafficking offenders, those who sexually abuse vulnerable people. And then we have a lawsuit against Twitter. And I'll talk about that a little later, but the Law Center is kind of an engine for public policy reform, both at the federal, state, and local level. And one of our priorities is this bill we'll discuss today, the Earn It Act, which is pending in both the Senate and the House.
Thank you, Eleanor. Rick, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, thanks again for inviting me, Pam, to this important discussion. I am the CEO of Iggy Ventures, but for this panel discussion, I actually volunteer my time advising online child safety groups about tech policy. I've worked on every major tech policy bill moving through Congress for over the past 30 years, including Section 230 as part of the Communications Decency Act, worked on the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, encryption legislation. Even behind me is the legislation was known as the e-sign bill, which legalized digital signatures online, which really is the foundation of internet commerce. And so when I left before Iggy, 15 plus years, I was the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for News Corporation, 21st Century Fox, focusing on obviously digital technology policy and other issues. I was the point policy person for when we bought MySpace, the first major social network at the time. And so when I saw what was happening on FOSTA SESTA, I decided to reach out to the National Center for Missing Exploited Children and offer my help in any way I can, both from a technology standpoint, but also from a legislative strategy standpoint. And then found a bunch of groups like Nicosi and others that we ended up winning 97-2, as I like to say, on FOSTA SESTA in the Senate. We would have been 98, but Senator McCain was sick. But his wife, Cindy, was working with us. So I'm kind of confident that he would have voted yes too. And from there, we started focusing on the Earn It Act and other tech policy related issues like WHOIS and some other internet governance issues that are happening around the world.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Rick. And Chris, tell us about yourself.
Hi, Pam. I am so pleased to be here with everyone who has joined us, but also with good friends, Rick and Eleanor, warriors in this, along with you, Pam. And so it's a real honor. My name is Chris McKenna. I'm the founder of Protect Young Eyes. We're an organization that is on the ground in schools and churches all over the country because we know that parents are afraid of what their kids might experience online. The cards are frankly stacked against them in a digital world that is moving far too fast for even good, amazing, intentional parents to keep up with the technologies today. So we focus on research, education, and advocacy. And we want to give practical solutions so that families are prepared, balanced, and protected online. But we need stronger forces, both at the corporate level, which is what the Law Center at Nicosi is doing, which is fabulous to enforce better compliance there. But we also want to come alongside amazing, strong legislation like the Earn It Act in order to provide some of those legislative guardrails, which quite frankly are decades behind the technologies that are confronting our law enforcement, our amazing agencies like NCMEC and others who are trying to keep up, and yet they need more. And so this conversation about the Earn It Act is so important as another tool to not only help those families that I work with, but ultimately to protect more children from some of the egregious harms that are out there. And so it's a real honor to be here. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all three of you for being willing to give your time and your expertise today. And some of you, I might be wondering who we are. So I'm Pam Strickland, again, founder of North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking. And we are a 12-year-old nonprofit here in North Carolina that has been working primarily in training and education and coalition building, but also extremely interested and engaged in the field of policy and legislative advocacy. And so we are thrilled to be a tiny little part of the coalition that Nicosi has started and is facilitating for the Earn It Act, and just really look forward to diving in today and learning a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of it, which I believe is probably why our attendees are here today. So I'm going to first of all ask Eleanor to give us just a little bit of background on the Earn It Act, and just broadly, you know, what is the problem? What problem do we have that Earn It is intended to solve?
Great question. There are millions of examples of child sexual abuse material on the web right now as we speak. And not just the dark web, the Tor, the kind of secretive places that criminals go, but on Twitter and on Google search and on pornography sites, but just on regular any old website, you can find child sexual abuse material. Used to be called child pornography. We don't like that term anymore because it sort of sanitizes what are the most egregious crimes that can be committed in any society. We're really talking about the rape of children on changing tables. We're talking about infants and toddlers and crimes against them. Right now, the FBI is so overwhelmed. Our federal law enforcement is so overwhelmed by reports of child sexual abuse material that they can only focus on trying to rescue infants and toddlers. This is because corporations and digital platforms have zero requirement under the, well, here's the thing. Their law shops tell them they have zero requirements under the law. Judges and courts have provided them with like a fortress of immunity against liability. Break that down. It means that no suit has been successfully prosecuted against a digital platform for committing an egregious federal crime, which is facilitating the circulation of child sexual abuse material. Earn It would end that. Earn It would say, Congress never intended to promote criminality. Congress never intended to allow those who are committing crimes and facilitating crimes, really, because, right, these digital platforms are facilitating crime, to get away with murder. So it would allow victims to sue these digital platforms. The case would still need to be proven. A victim would need to prove that that platform knowingly allowed that crime to be circulated. But right now we have a completely unregulated digital world, and that's a big plus for criminals, and that has encouraged more criminality. Here's the statistic that I want to leave you with. It's very chilling. Some 50 to 70% of those criminals who trade in this material are also hands-on offenders. This is not just exchanging bad pictures. This is actually encouraging people to commit the crime itself. And those of us in the human trafficking field know that the other thing this material is being used to groom kids in order to entice them into trafficking scenarios. So not only do we need to stop this because it's just rampant criminality, but also it is putting at greater and greater risk our youth.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, for giving us the background of why we're doing this, why we need this. And Rick, as our policy expert, can you explain, in your own expert opinion, of course, is this legislation the best way to go about solving this problem? And if it is, why? If it's not, why?
Well, there is no best way to solve this problem because it's so broad, as Eleanor just said. This is an important fix to a huge loophole that will hold platforms legally responsible for their actions. So is it the best? I can't say it's the best. Is it the only way? No, but it's an important step in protecting children online. And it gets to the issues that Eleanor just mentioned. CSAM is already illegal to disseminate. You can go after the quote individuals, and that's what the other side will tell you. Go after the individuals who are disseminating, but the platform should not be held responsible for that. That's what the Earn It Act fixes. It says that if a platform is knowingly engaged in the dissemination of this illegal content, it's illegal content. This isn't free speech. It's illegal content by definition. it doesn't have any First Amendment rights to distribute child pornography or CSAM. So if they are knowingly engaged in that, then they cannot hide behind Section 230 as a defense to that action. And that's critically important because the other side will argue, well, it's already criminal. Eleanor just said it's a criminal activity. The answer is yes, but not to the platforms themselves. The other thing that's really important about this legislation and the importance of going after Section 230 and modifying it in this way is that the criminal activity only applies to federal criminal law. And they always forget about that. They always say, oh, it's already criminal. It's already, against the law. It's already criminal. But it's only federal crimes and only federal criminal crimes. So any federal civil is not covered because civil is carved out of 230, as well as any state and local laws are carved out of the protections of 230, or they have protections against liability from state and local. So basically what this allows for is that the individuals who are harmed by the knowingly facilitation of CSAM materials across their platforms can be held accountable, not just federally and criminally, but state criminal and also civil. And those are very important facts that makes this legislation not the best, but incredibly important.
Thank you. Thank you for laying that out. And Chris, Rick just went over a couple of these, but
Sure.
could you go, I'm sorry. Could you
right,
go
right.
over, could you go over the all of the important points of this legislation?
Yeah, no, that was a really helpful overview from Rick, who then jumped into a little more detail to expand on a few of, there's 4 that I think rise to the top that are worth highlighting. The Earn It Act can be read in its entirety. There may be a few on the call who might do that thing, but at the top level, the Earn It Act creates an expert commission, which is a really important piece. These aren't required items that companies would have to implement because that gets into messy Fourth Amendment issues, but these are best practices. Think of best business practices. And it's not just one agency that is coming up with these. It's a cross-section of organizations, government agencies, law enforcement, prosecutors, academia, survivors, and nonprofit organizations and technology companies. And what this commission is intended to do is to compile what are being called sort of advisory best business practices about preventing, reducing, and responding to these sorts of digital crimes that Eleanor and Rick have pointed out there. So they're going to be voluntary, and that's important, not mandatory or binding under law, but to serve as a guide. I mean, what kind of teeth would this have if it didn't at least provide a guide? And that's what this commission is intended to do, again, with that cross-section. The second thing that it's going to do, which is what Rick just spent some time on, is it's going to amend CDA 230. And I want to be a little bit careful with that because Eleanor made a really important point. Anytime you talk about changing Section 230, it's somewhat of a nuclear topic. It gets a lot of people pretty riled up. But the way, when you read the law, and what Eleanor said, I think is really important here, this is actually a reminder and a clarification of what we believe was the original intent of Section 230 back in 1996. That was not intended to create a carve out for criminality. That is what has happened through cases over time. The phrase that Eleanor used there was that fortress of immunity. And I think that's a really powerful illustration for what's happened over the past 26 years. But the Earn It Act really says, no, listen, this is what we intended to do. And let's clarify in federal civil and state criminal and civil law what is still illegal today, and let's go after those things. And that's a really important point that I wanted to dive into a little bit more to build on what Rick said. It also, and Rick touched on this too, Eleanor did also, this replacement of in the code, removing child pornography and replacing that with child sexual abuse material. Those of us here in the movement, I think now automatically use CSAM as the more accurate description. And then finally, one that maybe doesn't always hit the headlines, but NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, does get a boost from this legislation, which I think is really important, around extending the time that law enforcement would have in order to track down evidence, more funding in terms of the DOJ And also making it, when there is knowledge, it's mandatory to report it to NCMEC, so then the proper channels can be followed. So those would be the things that I would highlight: that expert commission, the amendment, or as I like to say, the reminder of what CDA 230 was intended to do, that replacement of the terminology, but then also that boost to give NCMEC some more of the resources that it needs to do its very necessary work.
Thank you. That is such a great summary for those of us who may not be as familiar with it, just to break it down into those 4 segments. Thank you very much. So Eleanor, a couple of times when Rick was talking, he said, the other side will say. So, you know, this is such a great idea. How could anyone possibly be against it? So
exactly. Exactly. And here's the thing. Can Instagram and Snapchat and Google and Twitter say, we want the right to circulate child pornography? Of course not. Of course not. That's ridiculous. So they don't say that. They come up with other inventions. They claim it will undermine privacy and it will undo encryption and the sky will fall and Chicken Little will come out. I mean, Google search this term, Earn It Act, and you just get pages and pages and pages of negativity. And by the time by the end, you're like, oh, hell no. We don't want to put so much uncertainty and maybe unintended consequences into this like extraordinary tool that we all use all day long, right? But these are scare tactics. And if you get $1,000 an hour, like some of the tech lobbyists get, you know, you'll go ahead and exaggerate the pants off the arguments. And unfortunately, it's very disconcerting. There's a lot of misinformation around this bill, and it is because they can't say, we want to circulate the pictures of children being raped. Because that's what it is. It really is. I've talked to law enforcement officials who cry over the things they have witnessed online. And that's someone's child. And that's someone who's going to grow up. Here's the other horrifying thing about this problem. Once images are circulating online, they're downloaded and uploaded. They start appearing all over the world on websites all over the world. I have a very good friend who was groomed, and then her boyfriend recorded her doing a sexual act and then uploaded it to a pornography site. 2 videos 20 years ago. She now finds them on 45 sites worldwide. They will never come down. But compare it to this. If I try to upload 3 minutes of a Disney video on YouTube, it will be deleted immediately because we all acknowledge it's copyright law infringement. So because I put up a Disney video, it's deleted. I might be investigated, might have to pay a fine. But meanwhile, that friend of mine who was groomed for video that was secretly recorded, it's never coming down. And she is living with PTSD, an eating disorder, very serious results of this kind of chronic experience of that offense committed against her without her consent. So when you talk to victims, especially, you are so, victims say often, it's like I'm being raped every day because it's happening over and over again. And I never know who might have watched that worst day of my life. So this they can't defend, but who's the opponents? Basically all of big tech.
Thank you, Eleanor. Just an aside, the issue that you just now mentioned about victims who feel like, you know, they continue to be traumatized by these actions that and videos that were created long ago. If anyone is interested in learning more about that topic, there is a documentary called Not Just Pictures that you may be interested in, that was produced by Dr. Sharon Cooper, who, you know, is I'm not sure if she's currently on the NCMEC board, but she has been for many years, and speaks at conferences around the world about child sexual abuse. So encourage you to take a look at that if that's an issue that you're interested in. So Rick, again, as our policy expert, do these critics have some valid points?
Well, I mean, part of, as one who is a high-paid lobbyist, I'm not going to criticize high-paid lobbyists, but the issue really comes down to intermediary liability discussion. And Eleanor hit on an important point, which is under copyright law, on the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, it was determined by Congress and now really around the world that even though a user may post a copyrighted works, if the intermediary, so the internet service provider, YouTube, or whoever happens to be, Instagram, does not take it down or doesn't do other steps, they can be held liable, both criminally and civilly, for not taking that down and under copyright law. And so there's a whole history that actually Section 230 and the DMCA were occurring at the same time, because the CDA 230 has a carve out for all intellectual property. And that maybe another seminar on why that happened. But as a country, we have made a determination that there is liability that intermediaries should occur if they are knowingly facilitating an illegal activity. So remember, the Disney movie is not a First Amendment violation. It's not illegal content, the movie itself. It's legal content that is being distributed illegally. And that's how we have to look at this. This isn't about content, it's about conduct. It's the conduct of the sites that are knowingly facilitating not only illegal content, but doing something that's also illegal if we get 230 through. I mean, if we get the Internet Act through. And so that's a very important nuance on that. So the critics, the folks on the other side, their whole goal, and I was, I worked at the US Chamber of Commerce. I was the first director of e-commerce and internet technology. I know that liability reform is a huge issue. And what you'll hear is the 1,000 duck bites, is one of our friends say on the other side, of litigation that will put small businesses at risk. And that is, it's an interesting argument, but that's a general issue for general having a general legal reform, and I'm supportive of that. But you shouldn't carve out an entire industry because you have problems in general with legal reform issues. So that's one of the areas that I think needs to be addressed. The other issue that they get into is on the encryption debate and the Fourth Amendment debate, and I'm happy to discuss those as well. I don't know if Chris, you want to add anything at that point.
Well, you left me encryption and Fourth Amendment, so thank you.
No, I'm happy to do it.
That.
I just want to dominate the
I'm
conversation.
kidding, because those are, frankly, the red herrings to Eleanor's point, because they can't disagree with the real root of the Internet Act. So they say, look this way, look at Fourth Amendment. What I would say to that, which gets to, okay, who's on the other side supporting this, is Nkosi fabulously brought together 257 organizations across the entire country. These are represented by nonprofits, by survivor organizations, national organizations. Like, there was a question in the Q&A, we've used some insider language here to say NCMEC. We should have clarified that is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is maybe the global clearinghouse in terms of this egregious content that we've been talking about when it's identified. And the numbers that NCMEC is dealing with, these multiple tens of millions of files every single year, that is the organization we've been referring to, and they are behind this. And RAIN and International Justice Mission and Underground Railroad, OUR, others that are just saying yes. And so when it comes to the Fourth Amendment, I'm not an attorney. That's not my area of expertise. But I'm going to look to a letter that is full of attorneys, that is full of experts, that is full of centuries of expertise in this area, who are all saying, not a Fourth Amendment issue. Don't distract us in that way, right? Yeah, so that's what I would say to that, Rick. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, NCMEC is also federally chartered. I mean, they were created by an act of Congress to help in this specific space. John Walsh, America's Most Wanted, a famous Fox show, but it was because of his son Adam. And the history of NCMEC is amazing, and they are the gold standard. And when I talked to the general counsel at NCMEC, and she is telling me that we see no Fourth Amendment problem, And then I'm hearing from, and they are my friends, I'm on the other side saying that they are. I'm like, okay, am I going to listen to Silicon Valley, who has a vested interest in killing this bill, and they're saying there's a Fourth Amendment problem? Or am I going to listen to the General Counsel of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who's federally chartered to protect children? You know, who am I going to listen to? Because I'm not a lawyer either. And then the honest answer is, you know what? No one knows it's a Fourth Amendment issue until it reaches the Supreme Court. So we can all have our opinions, but until that time, I'm going to go with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the 240 other organizations that say it's not.
Thank you. Now, someone's going to have to explain to everyone about encryption. So, Rick, you're it.
Sure. The encryption debate, which I've been involved with for literally decades. In fact, I helped when there used to be very strict export requirements on encryption from the United States. And when I was at the chamber, I helped loosen those exports because I wanted the US companies to be able to compete in the worldwide encryption market. So this isn't an anti-encryption bill, as the other side likes to make it seem. What they argue is that under the commission, that there could be a best practice banning encryption. And there was some legitimacy to their argument when the commission in the 2020 had a federal mandate and there was like a rulemaking authority. I still didn't buy it then, but okay, I'll give them a little bit of credit there. But with this new commission, it's a recommendation. But in the legislation itself, there is a carve out for encryption. And I won't read the whole thing because it's long, but to put it to simplify it, it basically says that when there is a case under the Earn It Act, encryption itself cannot be a determining factor if you lose your Section 230 immunity. And that's very important. And the reason that that's very important is because if it was just the use of encryption makes you lose your 230 protections or makes you liable for CSAM, it would be, you would have every financial service industry player coming after this legislation, because then they could be saying, oh, well, we have banking transactions that are encrypted, which we all like, by the way, that are end-to-end encryption that we like, by the way. But now because we have encrypted dollars flowing that may be used for CSAM, that somehow now we can be held accountable and not have the protections. And that's just like saying that if they have encryption that could be held for money laundering because there's use of encryption in money laundering. It's not, it can't be the determining factor. It can be used after you have other evidence that shows that there is a potential knowing standard of violation of the Earn It Act. And then encryption can be used as an additional piece of evidence after the fact. And that's really important because just like in money laundering, it could be used, encryption can be used against a bank or somebody engaged in money laundering after the fact that they were trying to cover their tracks, that they were hiding their transactions. So encryption in of itself is not harmed in this legislation. If a website, and by the way this is worded, it does make it harder to prove 230 cases, because as they move to end encryption, it's going to be harder to find CSAM. And Nick Mick will tell you the parade of horribles, but that's an encryption debate. That's an end-to-end encryption debate, not an Earn It Act debate. And so as we're looking at this legislation, if you take it at its core, you have to already have evidence that they're in violation of the Earn It Act. And then if encryption is helping to contribute to that violation, yes, it can be used. But you can't say, oh, you're using WhatsApp is in violation of this because it's an end-to-end encrypted communications tool. That is just not accurate. And if you read the legislation, it clearly points that out.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. I want to go back a little bit to a point that was made previously when Eleanor said, and one of you expounded on it a little bit, said that, if she tried to upload a Disney clip, then it would be taken down immediately and she'd get, in trouble immediately. So we know that the technology exists for these platforms to immediately identify CSAM. Is that an accurate statement? And that they could immediately take it down? I mean, if they can immediately take down, if I put up a Disney, if they've got algorithms or whatever the magic is that they can identify that, how is it that they can't easily, or can they easily identify CSAM and immediately take it down?
The answer is yes and no. The reason they're able to take down a Disney movie, and I worked on this when we were at Fox, we had a lot of movies we would take down, obviously, off the net, but they're hashed. And so there are filtering technologies where you send them the hash. Google, YouTube has hash and hash marks. They're code that you can put into a filter, and the filter can block it or take it down. So that is true. So one of the things that's important for that NCMEC does is NCMEC uses hashes of CSAM. So it's not the actual pictures, right? It's not the pictures, it's code that you can look and try to take down more and more pictures. And sites use it. It was developed and first used, I believe, at Microsoft. What's Eleanor, the individual's name, or Chris, who developed
Professor
it?
Hanny Fareed from Berkeley helped develop it.
And so those things are available and they're getting more and more sophisticated. It does get a little difficult sometimes to know if it's the picture of what it is. They're getting better at it. You know, there's certain things that they're able to do that's getting more and more, but it's not 100%, but we're not looking at 100%. You know, if we can just save a child, 10 children, 20 children, you know, again, and that's sort of what we're looking at. So you're not looking for 100%. We're getting closer. We always hear about the future of AI and all the wonderful things that AI is going to bring in machine learning. And maybe we'll get to that point. But right now, it's rampant. So obviously, there isn't a economic incentive at this point to develop it because no one can be held accountable except for the people who are the users who are uploading the content. But the investment in trying to develop new technologies is just not there. The marketplace isn't there because there is no, Earn It Act to help create a marketplace to do better where these companies can do it. But you also see that on the drug issues, also on terrorism, there's a whole host of other issues where these platforms can do better, and there are technologies out there to do better.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thanks. Chris, can you tell us who the biggest supporters of this legislation are?
Yeah, so you heard me make reference before to a letter that Nkosi helped pull together with organizations that are a part of various coalitions and others. In fact, I remember, and Eleanor may remember this too, we have a call that occurs every week where we discuss the Earn It Act. I know that's how many of us know each other. And it's often visited by members of different Senate or House of Representative offices, chiefs of staff and others. And I remember the meeting where Eleanor presented this letter to a couple of the staff who we interact with, and they were blown away. They had never seen anything like this, which was a letter with 257 organizations with this amazing cross-section of support, different types of organizations, and they were giddy to have this. And so I think that just shows, and it's available. You can find it on Nkosi's website just to see who they are and see them by state and by type. But some that are out there, I may have mentioned a couple of these before. Let's see, there's, looking up and down here, a number of survivor organizations. So the Dream Center, Shade Movement, Survivors for Solutions, Truckers Against Trafficking, which is one that maybe some would recognize, who are doing great work to prevent the specific issue of human trafficking in the trucking industry, Citizens for Decency, Resilience Foundation, and many others. I could go up and down the list here, but I think the important thing is, Pam, is to say, this isn't just one type of organization, or this isn't just, say, a religious issue or whatever it might be. The variety that is represented in these, both small, large, national, local, faith-based, non-faith-based, survivor-led, nonprofit, it is every type of organization that is saying, listen, this is a problem, including law enforcement, which is really critical, right? They're the ones we're really trying to give them the tools. that are necessary here. And every single one of them, including organizations related to the technology like Child Safe NI and others who are saying, listen, the technologies are there. To Rick's point there, the technologies with the right motivation could absolutely be created. There's endless genius in these organizations that are saying, no, this isn't a good idea when it comes to growing the bottom line, but there's just no incentive for them to put the effort into creating these technologies, which we are very close to having. So I guess that's my point when it comes to who's behind it. It's an amazing group. It's a wide group of diverse group that are all saying, yes, we're all feeling this pressure. We're all feeling the problem, and we desperately need to do something about it.
And if I can just add to what Chris said, because it's to the Fourth Amendment argument. We have law enforcement. Eleanor, is it the state AGs and the National Association of State Prosecutors? We had someone on the call. So we have law enforcement agencies supporting the Earn It Act. Again, if it was a Fourth Amendment problem, they don't want their cases thrown out of court because they violated the Fourth Amendment. No one wants to see that because these are evil people. And if companies are knowingly facilitating and knowingly engaged in this type of activity, they should be held accountable. And that isn't a Fourth Amendment problem.
Thank you. Something that you all just mentioned law enforcement a couple of times, and something that I had heard from law enforcement is, the data that they get from NCMEC many times isn't prosecutable. It isn't enough information that they can actually do anything with it. And so, Chris, you mentioned that Earn It is going to make it now so that whatever data the platform has, they have to share.
That's correct. Yeah, that is correct. Now, it's not specific in terms of a certain type or quantity, but it does make it a requirement. The exact wording here, I'll just read it for you, is mandatory reporting to the cyber tip line when an internet service provider, an ISP, or these organizations we're talking about, obtain knowledge of apparent child sex trafficking or the apparent online enticement of a child on their systems or platforms. So it even gets into a little bit of some of what Rick was describing with encryption. It's this knowing, right? This knowing distribution and this knowing storing. If they have it, they must turn it over, and that's going to be compelled by the Earn It Act.
Which sounds really good, but if that becomes law, will they then stop collecting that data?
Well, that's a great point. And that's why I'm not a believer in totally repealing CDA 230. When CDA 230 was written, I was, working on the Hill then. But when it was written, there was two kind of incentives. And one of it was to encourage the platforms, back then they were bulletin boards, to monitor their sites, to moderate their sites, to take this stuff down. It's it's the Communications Decency Act, right? It's about decency online. It's not the ISP liability protection provision. That's not the intent. And so what has happened over time is that courts interpreted that if they did something, they were held harmless. If they did nothing, they were held harmless. So that's why we need to ensure that we don't get rid of all CDA 230, because we want to encourage good behavior. We want them to proactively look and not be held accountable for when they're doing the right thing because something happens to show up on their sites. So what we're looking at, I'll use Reddit. Reddit is a perfect example of how they're using CDA 230 to hide behind their own liability when when people know there is CSAM all over the subreddits. And how do they do it? They have volunteer moderators. That's their argument. We don't have all these moderators. We don't have as many as Facebook. We don't need them. We have volunteer moderators. And when I hear that, I think, so if I'm a moderator and I'm moderating a subreddit that has CSAM, I'm probably supporting the CSAM subreddit, right? I'm not going to report my own subreddit, but if someone does report it and it goes to law enforcement they can say, oh, well, we had moderators there. They didn't tell us that's user-generated content. And because of 230, you can't hold us accountable. So they're, as they're going to their IPO, and and the owners have billions of dollars, they're looking at like, well, why would I invest in a full-time moderator and a whole slew of moderators when I can do volunteer moderators and not be held liable? And that's a key. So they're using the Section 230 protections as a way to boost their own profits by not having to hire full-time employees who then could actively look. Is Reddit actively looking? No. If they have a terms of service that says we don't like it, but are they actively looking and trying to clean up their site? We have no evidence. In fact, the evidence, and Nicosi, if you want to read more about Reddit's problem, Nicosi has them on their Dirty Dozen list for 2022 and goes into detail of the problems of Reddit. They just don't even respond. Why don't they respond? Because they don't have to, because there's no way you can sue them to respond. Now, if they have counterfeit, if they have copyright materials that are uploaded to Reddit, then you have the ability to go find it and get it and sue them. But if it's a child, if it's CSAM, you're out of luck. And that can't be. And I do believe that we have to raise this awareness about Reddit, because they really are facilitating, according to Nicosi's research, CSAM. And they're not being held accountable. In fact, they're the darling of the potential IPO world going forward, in the next year or so.
Thank you for that, Rick. Well, we've talked about the pros and little tiny bit of con, and kind of gone into depth on the Earn It Act. And what I'd like now is for Eleanor to tell us kind of what's going on with the law, with the proposed legislation. We know it passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. What are the next steps? Is there anything that those of us that are listening can do to help?
Great. Well, I witnessed Pam Strickland basically creating a co-sponsor, Senator Tillis's staff, listened to a presentation by a small group of constituents from North Carolina, including Pam, and turned around, and within a few weeks, Senator Tillis was a co-sponsor. Co-sponsorship matters a lot. I think we have 23 or 24 right now. In order to convince the Senate leadership that we deserve to have time on the floor, we need to up that number of co-sponsors. So one immediate thing is to encourage Senator Burr to co-sponsor. I think we have held at least one meeting with his staff, but boy, he was recently contacting Nicosi a lot, his staff, in order to support a bill on sexual exploitation. So I know that the senator is interested in these topics, and let's try one more time to get that co-sponsorship. And then there's some members of Congress from North Carolina that aren't co-sponsors on the House side. But just generally contacting your delegation, because even if they are already a co-sponsor, they need to hear that people still care. So we advocate for folks contacting your congressional delegation to say, please support the Earn It Act, regardless of whether you look into do the research on whether or not they're already co-sponsor or not. That's what we need to do now. I'll ask Rick and Chris what else, but I'm still focused on trying to up those numbers of co-sponsors and showing our support, because Rick was just mentioning the Reddits and the subreddits. Well, those fans of Reddit are just on their machinery all the time, and they know how to contact their congressional delegations. And one of the things that's really slowed us down from, what this is, common sense legislation. This is really common sense. And what's slowing us down and getting in the way is that disinformation campaign that big tech and digital platforms have engaged in. So we've just sort of see the clarity of writing to our members. And it's so simple. If you just go to congress.gov, and in fact, I'll post it right now, but you can search for your state, or you put in your address, and it will tell you who your members are. And you click on those links, and they offer you very easily ways to say what's on your heart, what are you caring about, and it's doesn't take long. Rick, I see you.
Yeah, I was
poised
gonna
to
say, Eleanor,
jump
I
in.
think you guys, Nkosi has a great link just that you put in your information and it'll send a letter. And maybe you can put that into the link as
Let me
well.
put that in the link too. You're right. We also have a campaign. Thank you, Rick. We also have a campaign that makes it even easier.
Makes it even easier. And so I just want to get a plug Nkosi for all the great work they're doing. You know, I think it's important to understand how sometimes how Congress works, because a lot of people don't. And what Eleanor is talking about is, in order for legislation to move in the Senate, you have to have 60 votes. And the only way to show that you have 60 votes, pre-60 votes, is to have the 60 co-sponsors. And that will push leadership. Right now, Senator Schumer has no interest in moving this legislation. He's hearing from a lot of people in New York City and who have a different view, and from Silicon Valley who have a different view. And so it's not moving because he's like, well, I don't even know if you have the votes. And so if we get to the 60 number, it shows that we have enough to end debate, as they say. You saw that a lot, happening in Washington, the 60 number, right? That you have to get the 10 Republicans. Well, now we just need to get 30 Democrats and 30 Republicans, because this is a bipartisan issue. This isn't, this is a Blumenthal, Graham legislation, not many. And that's the other thing that's really important. The other side likes to say that this is controversial. When you have a unanimous vote out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the one that did Supreme Court hearings, that's doing gun legislation, that's doing all these social issues coming out, then and it comes out unanimously, it shows you how broad the support is. But we don't have the 60 votes. So you can have one member, a Senator Wyden or somebody else, or Rand Paul, bipartisan again, that could stop this legislation, but with 60 votes, they can't. And so that's why we need the 60 co-sponsors. On the House, we need also to have as many members co-sponsor, because we have to get that number up, because we are running into the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Chairman Nadler. If anyone's on this from New York and they're in Nadler, district, there's a good election primary coming up in a couple of weeks that I hope you vote for the other candidate. She's a wonderful individual, good Democrat, if you believe in that, if you're on that side of the aisle, Carolyn Maloney. But the issue is that we have people in power who are blocking this legislation. And the only way we can move it is just like we did with Fosta Sesta, is by own grassroots. Because as Eleanor said, the other side has media mechanisms. Reddit puts out across the Reddit site, oppose this legislation because it's going to shut us down. It's going to hinder free speech. It's going to stifle innovation, harm small businesses. We can't compete with that. We don't have, 200 million people like they do on Reddit, right? And so we need your help. We need your help. We need your friends' help. We need your family's help. We need everybody that reach out to them across this country and have them contact their members about how important this legislation is.
Thank you, Rick. Chris, is there anything
I was going to offer that in addition to that action, which is you literally put in your name and address, and it gives you a form letter that you click the button to send on. And then one more step is to actually have a meeting. Eleanor made reference to a meeting that you had to request that meeting. And that can seem really scary, right? That's an intimidating thing. But again, the resources are available. We have printable materials that Nkosi and others have put together, PDFs, high-level explanations that can be used in those. We'd be happy to share, to equip somebody. And what Rick said, outside of just this amazing state, we're all connected. So let's empower our friends and family to reach out to their senators or representatives to do the same thing. But these resources are available. These conversations, I know, can seem intimidating, but we want to empower those who are motivated to do so with as much, of these resources as possible. So.
Thank you. And we're going to be sending out a follow-up email to everyone who registered for this. So we will attach those resources that Nkosi has. We'll also put in a link to the email campaign. And that's good, but I will tell y'all, especially those of y'all who are from, either a business or nonprofit or a church, if you send a letter on your letterhead and, actually sign it, that does mean more. And definitely, like Chris was just saying, if you take the time to, a phone call is good, a Zoom meeting's good. Going and getting an in-person meeting is amazing. And it's not as scary as you think. You're not going to be meeting with your actual senator. You're going to be meeting with someone from their staff. And believe it or not, they actually want to hear from their constituents. So many bills come across their desk. There is no way for even their staff to be educated on every single one of them. So they don't know in many cases which ones they should even look at unless their constituents call or go by and say, hey, I care about this issue. This is one I want you to look at. And I've heard that from staff members. You know, we can't keep up with all of them. We're so glad you called us and let us know about this. So it's not as hard as you think. They're not intimidating at all. They want to hear from you.
And I can't stress that enough as a former congressional staffer. You know, they do respond. I know the media likes to talk. You know, I always laugh and it says, "Oh, the special interest killed this bill." We're all special interests, right? It just happens to be the other special interest did a better job than we did. That's usually what it is. And I think FOSTA SESTA is a perfect example. They spent millions and millions of dollars to defeat FOSTA SESTA and they got crushed. Why did they get crushed? Because we at special interests were better, louder, more organized, and had the right message to make a difference. And we have that here now, and we just have to make our voices heard. And I always I give lectures to schools around the country and to college classes about what it is to be a lobbyist. And I always tell them, if you want to read the best book about grassroots lobbying, it's written by a doctor and it's an easy read, but it's the best book ever about the importance of the voice. Horton Hears a Who. It's about grassroots lobbying. And it took JoJo with his yo-yo at the end. So everyone, and just think about it. Legislative process is just like Horton with that clover, and everyone's trying to kill it. You know, we have our Horton. You know, it's Graham and Blumenthal. Those are our Hortons. And you have the Rickinson brothers, and you have everyone else trying to kill it, right? And trying to bury it into committee. That's when they drop the clover into all the clovers, right? But Horton's there and pulls it out. And until they hear that last JoJo with his yo-yo and the grassroots pounding and Whoville, that's when they all decide, oh, we were for it all the time. And so we need to look at that, read that book, and know that your voice does matter up on Capitol Hill. And that's how we'll get this done.
Well, Rick, I gotta say, I did not foresee when I was planning this panel discussion that we were going to talk about Dr. Seuss, but I love it. I love it. Well, strangely enough, we really don't have any questions. So I'm going to say we've got like about 60 seconds. Is there any one of y'all that wants to give us just a last? I see Eleanor.
I have a question. Chris, what's your cute dog's name?
Well, they
He
were
was sort of
both in
moseying
here.
around.
Well, I've had 2 dogs and now 3 children participate in this phone call with us. So the McKenna family is fully on board, including our animals with the Earn It Act. And that was Molly and Amos joining me because they know how to open the door to my office. I can't stop.
Molly and Amos. Well, they're very cute.
Wonderful. Well, look, I just appreciate the 3 of you so much being here and sharing your expertise. And I just hope that all of our participants take this information to heart, take these calls to action here at the end to heart, and hope we're able to support you and win this one, just like we did FOSTA SESTA.
Well, thank you, Pam, for putting this all together.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Pam. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Y'all take care. We got off to a rough start.